Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the fascinating transformation of the modern music industry by looking at two radically different paths out of Nashville. We're going to examine how the shifting landscape of music production is literally forcing artists to rewrite the rules of survival, and honestly, how they're completely redefining what it means to be a musician today. So, let's start with a provocative question to really set the stakes here. What happens when the traditional music industry collapses and artists are forced to survive entirely on their own? As all those old, secure corporate structures crumble away, how do musicians actually adapt to a market that is getting increasingly risky and individualized? It's like a giant puzzle, and the pieces are constantly shifting.
Section 1. Disruption of Music Row. The End of an Era.
To put things into perspective, Nashville's music industry isn't just some quaint little artistic neighborhood. No, it is a massive $6.4 billion ecosystem. And historically, this whole ecosystem was built on a highly unionized, extremely complex division of labor. You had your A-team session players, massive recording studios, and corporate label executives all operating together under this one giant bureaucratic umbrella. But according to researchers at Princeton, that is all changing. We're transitioning away from that old bureaucratic corporate era of major labels and mass broadcasts straight into a highly competitive post-bureaucratic indie era. In this new world, the safety nets are just gone. The burden has shifted entirely onto entrepreneurial artists who now have to self-promote and carve out their own niche markets in a totally decentralized way, spread across diverse neighborhoods. If you've ever felt like modern creators have to act way more like startup CEOs than just artists, well, this structural shift is exactly why.
Section 2. Swift's pop departure, the global crossover.
Okay, so this massive transition basically creates two distinct paths for artists to take. Let's look at Path A first, the global crossover exit. And this is perfectly captured by Taylor Swift's landmark album 1989. Swift, utilizing the independent music role label Big Machine Records, made a really calculated decision to publicly abandon country music from mainstream pop. She saw the shifting landscape, and rather than staying boxed within the traditional confines of the Nashville machine, she essentially used it as a launchpad to completely redefine her brand on a global scale. And the results? Absolutely astonishing. I mean, despite a music market that was literally spiraling downward from a massive flight away from physical products, 1989 miraculously sold 1.25 million physical copies in its debut week alone. That was a historic achievement that broke a dozen-year record. It proved she could command this modern market unlike pretty much anyone else.
So how did she actually pull off selling that many physical copies? Well, as we can see from her own words, Swift firmly believed in the financial value of art. She achieved this massive feat by actually embargoing the streaming service Spotify entirely and driving her fans directly to physical retail spaces, like Target. She took absolute control of her distribution, proving she's the artist of a generation who could bend a collapsing industry to her will, and honestly, forcing all of us to rethink how we value and pay for the music we consume.
Section 3. The pop formula debate, authenticity versus pop. Now, to really understand the cultural friction of this era, we have to look at the prevailing genre critique from purists who stayed rooted in the traditional scene. Critics, like one reviewer from Saving Country Music, drew a really sharp contrast. They compared her authentic acoustic roots, the girl with the guitar writing personal narratives, against what they deemed a highly produced Swedish hitmaker formula. They were quick to point out that the album heavily utilized pop super producers like Max Martin and Shellback, moving away from organic instrumentation and leaning into rhythmically repetitive tracks optimized for mass consumption. And this quote right here vividly illustrates that purist backlash. Reviewers argued that Swift's vocals and lyrics became mere sonic elements, just sort of placed into scientifically formulated tracks, effectively erasing the original inspiration. While we're staying totally neutral on the music itself here, this critique is absolutely vital to understand. It highlights the intense friction that happens when an artist chooses that hyper-individualized global pop path and leaves their original community's norms far behind. But if Taylor Swift represents the hyper-individualized exit to global pop, what happens to the artists who stay behind in Nashville? How in the world are they navigating the collapse of the corporate structure and what researchers call this intense individualization of risk?
Section 4. The activist movement, a grassroots rebellion.
Well, this brings us to Path B, a grassroots local rebellion.
To combat this modern individualization of risk, where the burden of success and failure falls completely on the solo entrepreneur, a totally new breed of musicians is rising up. Enter the artist activists. These are visionary peers taking occupational self-determination into their own hands. They're intentionally creating inclusive, place-based communities to share the load, minimize risk, and support each other in a really precarious era. If you've ever felt the intense pressure and isolation of the modern gig economy, you'll understand exactly why these artists decided to band together.
The Princeton text actually categorizes these activists into 3 distinct roles. You've got enterprising artists who mentor and produce for their peers, then artistic social entrepreneurs who physically build the venues and spaces to foster talent, and finally, artist advocates who work to reform legacy institutions like unions. All 3 of these roles are working together to replace those old corporate safety nets with new, peer-driven communities.
Section 5. Rebuilding communities, local spaces.
Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. Jack White and his Third Man Records perfectly embody the enterprising artist. Instead of outsourcing, White created a physical headquarters right in Nashville that includes a record store, a venue, a recording booth, label offices, and get this, even a darkroom. He literally described it as the whole shebang, a one-stop creativity shop. He's out there producing his own work and others, keeping the artistry intensely local and collaborative. And beyond individual labels, this movement includes social entrepreneurs like Mervyn Luke. He opened the Douglas Corner venue specifically to showcase new songwriters, creating a real home away from home for future stars. It also includes advocates like Dave Pomeroy, who actually staged a massive grassroots takeover of the local 257 Musicians Union. He transformed a legacy organization to better serve the needs of modern independent artists. They are literally rebuilding the infrastructure of the city's music scene from the ground up.
Section 6. 2 paths for artists. Gimmick versus community. So when we bring these 2 narratives together, it's fascinating. Both Swift and White recognized the immense value of physical mediums in a digital age, but they used them for entirely opposite goals. As that Country Music Review noted, Swift included mock Polaroids and golden sweepstakes tickets in her CDs to fuel a massive, individual, global brand and drive social traffic back to herself. Meanwhile, Jack White utilized Nashville's legendary United record pressing plant to manufacture vinyl, cementing a local, physical community and actively supporting local manufacturing jobs. 2 wildly different approaches to the exact same problem. Ultimately, both of these paths are symptoms of what sociologists call the concentration competition cycle. Basically, it's a natural sociological shift where a long era of concentrated homogeneous corporate industry, like the old Music Row, is inevitably followed by a massive burst of highly competitive, genre-diverse, and wildly entrepreneurial creativity. We see the ripples of this all around us today, and how fragmented, diverse, and niche our personal playlists have become compared to the old radio-dominated past. Which leaves us with one final thought to take away from this explainer today. Moving forward, as the old music industry continues to fracture and those safety nets disappear entirely, where will the true soul of the music industry live? Will the future of art belong to the global, hyper-individualized megastar or the local, grassroots community builder? It's a huge question. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll leave you to ponder that until next time.